Cornmeal mush was a traditional breakfast in Appalachia for generations. Actually, not even just a breakfast, just one of the meals that they would eat, cornmeal mush. And there's a lot of reasons why, but predominantly the reason is because most people in Appalachia, whether they were kind of subsistence farmers just farming for themselves, or if they were farming on a larger scale, they grew corn. Corn was their primary crop. They used corn to feed their animals, but they also used it to feed themselves. That was like part of a large part of their diet was corn. Of course, in those wonderful fresh corn months of the year, the summertime months, you could eat roasting ears and fried corn and pickled corn and all those kind of wonderful things. But a lot of what they had to do with their corn was to dry it for winter use. And that was winter use for their animals, to feed their animals, but also, as I said, to feed them. So a lot of their diet consisted of that dried corn that they would take to the local miller, and they would have ground into cornmeal to use for in a variety of different ways, especially for cornbread, corn dodgers, those kind of things, any kind of thing like that. But also they made cornmeal mush out of it. So if you've never had cornmeal mush, you think of grits, but a much smoother texture because cornmeal is ground finer than the grit of the corn. It's a thicker grind, you know, when you're making grits from dried corn. So think of like a creamy type of, like cream of wheat, if you've ever had that. That's very similar to mush, most people just call it. Now, I didn't grow up eating cornmeal mush. By the time I come along, grits were readily available and oatmeal was easy to have, and of course cereals, which most kids like and we did like. And Granny often made biscuits and eggs and those type of breakfasts for us when I was living at home. But Pap had these wonderful memories of cornmeal mush. And he said often what they would do, because of course times were hard, his mother would fix it for breakfast, and that was okay, he could eat it like that, and they would sweeten it with either honey or sorghum, typically sorghum syrup, because that's what they had on hand more than honey. That was more readily available. And then what was left over, she would pour into a little tin or a pan, and it would solidify through the day. And then for supper, she would slice it and then fry that. So that was two different ways that you could again utilize that corn that you always had, because you made sure that you grew enough to make it through the winter. So those were two different methods of using cornmeal mush. Some people really like it. They really like the fried version, and they don't much care for just the boiled version. Other people don't like either. It's got a different texture, as you might imagine. But I think it's very good. You'll often read and hear about, I do when I talk about cornmeal mush, a lot of older people who don't really eat it all the time, but they have those memories like Pap did, so every once in a while they'll decide they want a bowl of cornmeal mush, or they want to make some and let it solidify and then fry it and eat it with eggs, or again eat it with syrup or honey. So they have those memories that bring them back to eating that cornmeal mush. I'm going to show you how to make it both ways, but first I'm going to read you just a little portion this is out of Smokehouse Ham, Spoon Bread, and Scoopernong Wine by Joseph E. Dabney. It's a really great cookbook if you've never seen it. It's got wonderful recipes in it, but it's got all these little tidbits of history and information and comments and memories and stuff from individuals. It's really a wonderful book. So let's see, cornmeal mush. Fried mush, and whole grained hominy have been more popular in the southern Appalachians over the years than grits. In 1824, Mary Randolph, in her pioneering Southern cookbook, The Virginia Housewife, gave recipes for polenta, mush, and other corn-based dishes. Mush is similar to grits except made with finer ground cornmeal. It becomes a type of porridge, or what the Italians call polenta. All it takes to make mush is to add boiling water or milk and stir it constantly while the meal is being added. And making fried mush is very similar to frying grits. You put the mush mixture in a buttered loaf pan and let it congeal overnight. The next day, drop the mush out and slice for frying with butter. Here is a typical mush recipe. The dish can be served hot with butter and honey, syrup, or sugar. And then mountain mush is just 5 cups of boiling water, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 cup freshly ground cornmeal. Into a saucepan, place the water and salt, bring to a quick boil, and slowly pour in the cornmeal in a thin trickle, and that helps it keep from lumping up on you. Stir constantly with a wire whisk to avoid lumpiness, and let cook for around 18 to 20 minutes, and that serves about 6. So Matt's Aunt Wanda, she's one of those that has those fond memories of eating cornmeal mush when she was little and really liked it. So one year we were there at Christmas and she made it for me. And her recipe's slightly different than this one. She didn't use near that much water, but she did use a cup of cornmeal. So that's one of those things you can kind of play with. But since it's just water and it's just cornmeal, and I'm sure that you've made grits or oatmeal, you can kind of get the gist of how the recipe works for sure. So if you'll notice in the recipe, it suggests that you use freshly ground cornmeal. That sometimes can be hard for people to find, but the main thing is you just want to make sure it's not a mix, it's just cornmeal. I personally use a mix when I make cornbread. I like White Lily cornmeal mix. That's what I use. But that mix means that it has leavening in it and it has a small amount of flour in it too. So for real authentic cornmeal mush, you want to make sure you just have cornmeal. I'm lucky, those of you who watch all our videos will remember our great episode where we got to go with Clay Logan and Mr. Delorier, and they showed us how to grind corn. So I've got some of that today that I'm going to use. But you can find for cornmeal, strictly cornmeal, pure cornmeal in most grocery stores. So even if you don't have access to fresh ground like I'm using today, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So now I'm going to show you how to make cornmeal mush. So I have my water boiling. I'm halving the recipe, so I only have 2½ cups of water instead of 5, and I'm only going to use 1/2 cup of cornmeal. And I'm going to put 1/2 teaspoon, go ahead and put 1/2 teaspoon of salt into the water. And then I'm going to gently pour the cornmeal in while stirring. And the reason you want to do it slowly is just to try to prevent it from lumping up on you. You know, grits and oatmeal, well, not so much oatmeal, but grits has a tendency to do that too. So Corey's going to help me finish putting it in there because I was having a hard time. It's hard to cook when you have a camera and you're trying to think about angles, and I need to turn it down. So now we're going to turn it down and we're going to let it cook for 18 to 20 minutes. So while our mush is continuing to cook, now I've got my cast iron pan heating on this side, and as you can see right here, this is my mush that I let sit overnight. So you can see how firm it is, how it firmed up nicely. So I'm going to slice it, and then we're going to fry it on both sides, brown it in the pan. Now you can fry it in butter, which is probably what I'm going to use today, but also people often use bacon grease, so you could use bacon grease as well to fry it. And I'm sure you could use olive oil or vegetable oil or canola oil, coconut oil even probably would be good. Any of those kind of things, whatever you prefer. Okay, we're going to and the thickness or the thinness just depends on personal preference. If you want to cut them very thin and try to get really crunchy on both sides, or if you want to go for more of a thicker cut, that's just up to you. And this is one of those things that is already cooked. It's already done, so you're really just browning it on each side and heating it through. Now we're ready to taste the mush. I'm going to start with the creamy kind. I've got me some butter in there, and I'm going to sweeten it with sorghum syrup. because that's what Pap would have used. You could use honey, you could use jelly, you could use sugar, definitely, all those different things. I love sorghum anyway, so that's an easy one for me to think about using. You could add some milk, some half and half or cream to it. I think that would be especially good if you needed to. So you can see the texture of it is a lot like grits, only smoother, more like cream of wheat for sure. And the taste is very similar to cream of wheat or grits, for sure. When I had it before, I've always had it in conjunction with like toast and biscuits and also eggs. So I think that's what it's missing right now. If I had a plate of eggs and some bacon and some either toast or biscuits to dip into it, that would be really good. It is because it has that smoother than grits. It doesn't have that grittiness. It's a mouthfeel that a lot of people don't care for, that they don't like the texture of it. But I think it's pretty good. Now we're going to try the fried version. So I had a little bit of butter I was going to smear on top of one of them, melted. And I think I'll just dip it in my syrup there since I've still got some in the spoon. It took a long time to actually get it to brown up any on each side, so that may be something that you need to play with. I can see why so many people like it fried better than the other way. It has little crunchy parts on it that really bring out that nuttiness of the cornmeal. And then you've got the creaminess of the inside of the mush. It's still very creamy. It kind of goes with that crunchy part. Fried would definitely be my favorite for sure. And I can imagine if you used bacon grease, it would change the flavor slightly. This is very mild flavor because of the butter. But very good. So I hope that you enjoyed learning about eating cornmeal mush in Appalachia. Not as many people eat it today as in days gone by. But there are people who still do, and especially those people, like I was mentioning, that have those fond memories where every once in a while they decide they want some cornmeal mush like their mother made when they were children. If you were a fan of it and you eat it, please share a comment and tell us, what did you like to put in it? Did you put honey or sorghum, or maybe you put sugar, maybe y'all put jelly? Leave us a comment and tell us how cornmeal mush was eaten at your family table, or if it's still eaten today. And as always, we hope you'll continue to drop back by to help us celebrate Appalachia, which is a lot of traditional foodways like cornmeal mush.